Hey guys, tonight we'll peel back the darkest chapter in the history of the Tudor court, a story revolving around a young woman named Bessie Blount and the secret of her giving birth to the first son of King Henry VIII. This was an event that shook England and exposed the cruelty of royal power. Imagine this. In the dead of the silent night in the Tower, the cry of a newborn baby tore through the silence, bringing with it the ultimate hope that England had longed for. It was a boy, the son of Henry VIII, the child the king had prayed for, the heir who had been born. But ironically, the woman who gave him that priceless gift was not Queen Catherine of Aragon, who was suffering through multiple failed and heartbreaking deliveries. She was Bessie Blount, a 17-year-old girl, kept hidden as a shameful secret. While the Queen bore the blame, the cruel whispers, and the pointing fingers for failing to bear Henry a son, the person who gave him what he wanted, a healthy boy, was cast into isolation. Bessie's triumph had turned into a prison in a tower. So, what was Henry's true motive? Did he crave a son to secure the throne, or was it simply the pride of a king demanding that everything yield to his will? Why did he humiliate the woman who gave him exactly what he wanted? What happened to Bessie and her little son after this historical moment? The truth behind their fate is not only shocking, but also reveals the ruthless face of power. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what your local time is right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Inside the dim stone walls of the tower, a lone cry cut through the hush like a fragile blade. After what felt like endless hours of labor tense, taxing and dolorous, the midwife, her face pale beneath the candlelight, finally spoke those two life-altering words. It's a boy. Yet this was no ordinary child. This was the son King Henry VIII had yearned for, the very heir his lawful wife had failed to produce. And the woman who had brought forth this precious infant was neither queen nor consort. She was merely a 17-year-old girl, Elizabeth Bessie Blount, concealed from court as though she were some ignominious secret. For years, Queen Catherine of Aragon had endured one miscarriage after another, her heart racked by the loss of each unborn child, and her reputation tarnished by whispered accusations among the courtiers. Each bereavement deepened the king's disappointment, and each accusation chipped away at her dignity. In the eyes of the realm, she had become the living embodiment of failure, a queen who could not fulfill her primary duty, to bear a male heir. All the while, the royal court's gossip swirled like a murky mist, and Catherine, for all her piety and devotion, found herself the target of fingers pointed and tongues wagging. Then came Bessie Blount, taken into court as a lady-in-waiting at the age of 12. She had dazzled with her pale, luminous skin, full lips, and a vitality that seemed to shine from within. King Henry VIII, then a vigorous young monarch of 23, noticed her first at one of his famed masquerades, where dancers whirled beneath dripping candelabras, and the night's revelry blurred the rigid lines of rank. Bessie moved among the guests with an effortless grace, her laughter light and her presence electrifying. The king, entranced by her beauty and vivacity, soon made her his favoured companion. For 4 years, their clandestine liaison remained veiled from the public eye. Henry lavished her with tokens of regal affection, embroidered gowns of the finest cloth, jewelled necklaces that caught the torchlight, and letters penned in his own hand, each one a testament to his enthrallment. Yet Bessie lacked the protection of a husband, a fact that left her perilously exposed. Most royal mistresses were noble women already wed, so that any child born of an illicit union could be plausibly claimed by a husband's lineage. But Bessie was unmarried, and thus, when her body began to change, there was no convenient pretense to hide her condition. In the summer of 1518, Bessie realized she was with child. Imagine the storm of fear and exhilaration that must have swirled within her 17-year-old heart as the court's whispers grew louder, and the Queen's own hopes dimmed further with each of Catherine's miscarriages. Then, in June of 1519, the moment arrived. Removed to a secluded chamber of a remote monastery, watched by vigilant attendants, Bessie endured a labour both arduous and agonizing. When the midwife's announcement finally rang out, it was both triumph and tragedy intertwined. Henry Fitzroy, meaning son of the king in Norman French, was born healthy and strong, the living proof that the king could sire a male heir. The court rejoiced, trumpets blared, banners unfurled, and Henry VIII himself paraded the infant before awed onlookers. Yet beyond the fanfare lay a darker truth. This child, acknowledged and ennobled, effectively undermined Queen Catherine's position, sealing her fate in the annals of dynastic politics. For Bessie, however, the glory was fleeting. No sooner had she fulfilled her role in Henry's grand design than she found herself cast aside. Hidden within the tower's stones, she, once the object of the king's ardour, was reduced to a shadowed memory of her former splendour. Alone in that cold fortress, Bessie pondered the nature of her own worth. Had Henry desired a son to preserve his lineage, or had he simply satisfied his regal pride? Why, at the precise moment she delivered his long-awaited heir, was she abandoned by the very man she had served so loyally? This solitary question would haunt her days, guiding her uncertain steps into exile from court and beyond. But the legacy of that night, when a newborn's first cry echoed through the tower's gloom, would resound for centuries to come, as both a symbol of royal triumph and a tragic reminder of the woman who paid the ultimate price. And so begins the tale of Bessie Blount and her royal son, a story of power, heartache, and the fragile threads of destiny that bind us all. In the year 1498, in the gentle rolling hills of Shropshire, Sir John Blount and his wife, Catherine Peschel, welcomed their firstborn child, a daughter they formerly named Elizabeth, but affectionately called Bessie, or, more commonly, Bessie, born into a family already woven into the tapestry of Tudor influence. Her father having served closely at the side of King Henry VII, even bearing arms alongside him on the fields of France, Bessie arrived carrying both the promise of her bloodline and the weight of her family's ambitions. Yet, amid the prestige lay a delicate fragility. Her mother, Catherine, had been married at the tender age of 10 and became a mother herself at 16, leaving her ill-prepared for the trials of parenthood. In many ways, Catherine and young Bessie resembled sisters more than mother and child, bound by youth rather than by years of maternal experience. From her earliest days, Bessie's presence was luminous. Chroniclers would later recall her skin as pale as fine porcelain, her lips full and softly curved, and her features alight with a vitality that seemed to glow from within. Each portrait, though scarce, echoed the same refrain. She possessed a beauty that was at once sensuous yet restrained, radiant without artifice. In the Tudor era, beauty was currency, a form of capital that could secure advantageous matches, elevate a family's standing, and open doors to spheres otherwise closed to lesser folk. For daughters of minor gentry, a striking visage offered a rare opportunity to ascend the social hierarchy, provided one's lineage carried even the faintest whisper of courtly favour. Thus, when Bessie reached the age of 12, her parents faced a decision of monumental consequence. Understanding full well that their daughter's looks and her father's royal connections might translate into lasting security, they entrusted the girl to the service of the Queen herself, Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of King Henry VIII. To be chosen as a royal lady-in-waiting was to strike gold in the Tudor lottery. Only a handful of families were ever afforded the honour, and the competition was fierce. Hundreds of aspirants vied for the roles, their worth judged not only by pedigree, but by elicited grace, mannered comportment, and the subtle art of courtly grace. For Bessie, the transition was both exhilarating and daunting. She left behind the familiar lanes of Shropshire for the vast corridors of Greenwich Palace, where torchlight danced across tapestry-lined walls, and the air was thick with the perfume of candle wax and perfumed gloves. There she would learn to curtsy before the Queen, to address noble guests with the perfect balance of deference and poise, and to engage in the daily rituals that governed courtly life. Her youth, barely 12 years, since her miraculous birth, belied the composure she displayed among far older and more practiced companions. Where many girls her age might stumble at the sight of robed ambassadors or tremble under the scrutiny of seasoned courtiers, Bessie glided forward with an almost preternatural assurance. Yet beneath her composed exterior lay the sharp awareness that her beauty, once her greatest gift, might also become her most perilous burden. In the Tudor court, alliances shifted as swiftly as the wind, and favour could turn to disfavour in the flutter of a fan or the misstep of a dance. Bessie sensed that to secure her family's future, she must navigate this world of whispered intrigues and unspoken codes, with a careful blend of charm and circumspection. Every smile, every curtsy, every measured word was a thread in a delicate tapestry she could neither unravel nor replace. Each dawn at court greeted her with the rustle of silk petticoats and the soft murmur of pages delivering the day's commands. She learned to rise before the sun, to attend mass in the chapel adorned with stained glass depicting the Passion, and to exchange polite confidences with fellow ladies of noble birth. In the hush of the Queen's private chambers, she observed Catherine of Aragon's quiet, dignified sorrow, an undercurrent of loss that rippled through their shared service. For the Queen's own hopes of a son had dimmed with each miscarriage. It was in those silenced moments that Bessie became ever more aware of the invisible line that separated her seasonal joy from the Queen's enduring hope. Thus, at 12 years of age, Elizabeth Bessie Blount's life shifted irrevocably from the pastoral certainty of Shropshire to the opulent uncertainties of the Tudor court. The choice her parents made carried the promise of prestige, but also the peril of becoming an unwitting pawn in the great game of dynastic ambition. And so, as Bessie stepped forward into the gilded halls of Catherine of Aragon's service, she did so under the weight of expectations far beyond her years, her youth, both her shield and her vulnerability, in a world where every glance could bear 1,000 meanings. A 12-year-old girl stepping through the threshold of the royal antechamber would have felt the weight of centuries pressing upon her, as if every stone and tapestry in Greenwich Palace bore witness to a lineage of power and expectation. In the year 1514, Lady Elizabeth Blount, known to all as Bessie, found herself in that very crucible, joining the select ranks of would-be ladies in waiting to Her Majesty, Catherine of Aragon. The opportunity was rarer than a midsummer rose in blossom, extended to only a precious few among England's gentry. Yet for every daughter chosen, hundreds more miserly missed the mark, their hopes dashed in the face of a brutally exacting selection. Prospective attendants underwent trials that tested more than mere beauty. First came the appraisal of visage. Each candidate's complexion, the gentle arch of her brows, and the soft curve of her lips were measured against prevailing ideals. Next came trials of deportment, stately curtsies, the poise of a poised figure moving, as if in perpetual harmony with an unseen melody. But what truly distinguished the exceptional were demonstrations of grace and accomplishment, proficiency upon lute, virginal or psaltery, the confidence to converse in measured tones of courtly French and Latin, the ability to host an assembly of noble guests with neither faux pas nor errant laughter, and the capacity to evoke both elegance and warmth in the performance of a minuet. From the very outset, young Bessie outshone her contemporaries. Her touch upon the lute was deft and delicate, each note drifting through the vaulted hallways like a whisper. Her dance steps, though learned in the quiet of provincial Shropshire halls, carried the finesse of someone born to the stage. She floated across the floor, her skirts billowing around her slender form as if caught in a gentle breeze. Those in attendance recalled how her hands, small and sure, flew over the virginal keys with a mastery that belied her years, summoning a melody both plaintive and sweet. And when she sang, her voice rose pure and serene, as though plucked from a dream. It was this aura of natural brilliance that set her apart in that fateful year of 1514. King Henry VIII, then a vigorous young monarch of 23 summers, had not yet grown into the rotund, ailing sovereign, immortalized in later portraits by Hans Holbein. At that time, his auburn hair glowed beneath the torchlight, his limbs were lithe and capable, and his laughter rang clear across the great banqueting halls. He delighted in the court's masques and revels, nights when courtiers shed their rigid hierarchies beneath painted masks and danced until dawn's first light. It was during one such revel in the late autumn of 1514 that Bessie first caught the king's eye. Amid swirling gowns and the heady scent of spiced wine, she stepped into the circle of the masque, her satin skirts rustling in time with the soft drumbeat. Candlelight danced across her pale features, illuminating the gentle curve of her cheek and the lively spark in her grey-blue eyes. To Henry, accustomed to the calculated performances of his adult peers, Bessie's presence was nothing short of electrifying. She moved not with studied precision, but with an ease that suggested the music dwelled within her very bones. That night, while the court whirled in elaborate revelry, the king could scarce bear to look away. Every measured bow she offered, every gracious nod, drew him ever closer. He observed the subtle arch of her neck as she exchanged pleasantries with a visiting envoy. He noted the way her laughter rippled through the company when a jester's caper grew too bold. In a hall teeming with expecting eyes, ambassadors from France, Spain, the Low Countries, Henry's attention remained riveted upon this single-spirited girl of scarcely 13. By the hour of midnight, when the masque drew to its final hushed tableau, the monarch approached her side. Others gasped as he offered his hand in a gesture both formal and intimate, inviting her to dance. And though her heart may have fluttered with youthful trepidation, Bessie placed her slender fingers in his, following his lead as the music swelled one final time. In that fragile moment, beneath the glow of flickering torches, a silent accord was struck. She, the maiden of humble birth, and he, the sovereign of England, would henceforth share a bond that neither convention nor council could easily sever. As the last strains of music faded into the night, Bessie Blount stood, breathless, at the centre of a grand court's gaze, and there, in the hush that followed, her destiny entwined irrevocably with that of King Henry VIII. The king's entanglements had always been conducted with a certain discretion befitting his station. Royal mistresses were expected to exist in the shadows, their liaisons whispered about in hushed tones but generally kept from the glare of public scrutiny. Yet King Henry VIII's passion for Bessie Blount transcended the casual diversions afforded to a monarch's fleeting amusements. The historian Philippa Jones would later observe that Henry loved with a fervour bordering on perilous obsession, a line of devotion that unsettled even the most experienced courtiers. In July of 1514, to cement his bond with the young lady, Henry dispatched to Sir John Blount a sum of £146 sterling, a princely fortune in its own right. When adjusted for contemporary purchasing power, this gift would exceed 200,000 United States dollars today, an offering described as both a token of gratitude and a fee for guardianship. That it functioned as nothing less than a bribe is indisputable, for the Blount family's discretion was bought with gold, ensuring they would neither question nor obstruct the king's dealings with their daughter. Most of Henry's notable companions had the guise of matrimony to shield them. A noblewoman already wed could bear a child in secret, and any scandal could be smoothed over by attributing the birth to her lawful husband. Bessie, however, remained uncounselled by a spouse. She was unmarried and thus wholly exposed any whisper of impropriety, threatened both her reputation and her family's standing. Yet the king, heedless of convention, lavishly adorned her with treasures. Jewels glittering like captured starlight, silken gowns of the richest cloth dyed in hues imported from Italy, and letters penned in Henry's own hand, each stroke of the quill an emblem of his unwavering ardour. Invitation after invitation arrived for Bessie to attend nightly banquets in the Tower's sumptuous Green Gallery, known colloquially as the Jade Hall, where illuminated lamps and draped tapestries set the stage for sumptuous feasts. There, beneath the soft glow of candlelight, she sat beside the king at a long refectory table, savouring delicacies flown in from across Christendom. Spiced peacocks roasted whole, sweetmeats gilded with edible gold leaf, and flasks of wine from Gascony poured into goblets chased with silver filigree. As minstrels swept their bows across vials and a steady pulse of percussion beat a languorous rhythm, Henry and Bessie shared furtive conversations, the hush of intimacy shielding them from the prying eyes of count and earl. Behind this lavish veneer, however, the court's judgmental sighs lingered. Queen Catherine, now 38 years old, nearly a decade Bessie's senior, had endured a litany of miscarriages, each heartbreak public property, and each loss a source of caustic gossip among courtiers. In the years between 1510 and 1516, Catherine suffered no fewer than 4 known miscarriages, her hope for a male heir dashed again and again. Every pregnancy ended too soon, unnamed infants born lifeless or lost in their mother's womb, leaving Catherine to mourn not only the children she carried, but the very stability of her marriage. Catherine's plight invited both sympathy and scorn. To some, she was a symbol of sanctity and perseverance, her devout prayers to Saint Mary for an heir evoking genuine compassion. To others, she became the living emblem of failure, a queen who could not fulfill her sovereign's most urgent desire. Baron and bishop alike cast glances heavy with reproach, as though Catherine's womb alone were to blame for the crown's precarious succession. In great halls and quiet corners, Tongues wagged that the royal marriage was cursed, that Catherine's body had been found wanting. Amid this atmosphere of scandal and sorrow, Bessie's ascent seemed a cruel twist of fate. The very gifts Henry bestowed upon her, the bracelets encrusted with garnets, the velvet cloaks trimmed in ermine, only deepened the chasm between her gilded present and Catherine's shrouded despair. It was a world turned upside down, in which the king's affection appeared to reward a teenage beauty while casting aside the queen's dutiful piety. And yet, in the hushed afterglow of each banquet, as revellers drifted away and torches guttered low, Henry and Bessie clung to one another's presence, a fragile sanctuary against the court's relentless scrutiny. Her laughter, bright and unburdened, soothed his anxieties. Her youthful countenance reminded him that beneath the crown lay a man still capable of wonder. But the price of that comfort was steep, for with each sumptuous gift, with each torchlit revel, they wove a tapestry of intimacy that threatened to unravel Catherine's dignity and the realm's stability alike. Thus, in the summer of 1514, as the court watched and whispered, Henry VIII indulged his deepest impulses, showering Bessie Blount with every symbol of devotion he could command. Yet beneath the surface splendour lurked the shadows of scandal, for every gift confirmed his disregard for convention and deepened the wounds of a queen who had given everything but a son. The Tudor vessel continued to sail through turbulent waters as the years wore on. In February of 1516, Queen Catherine at last gave birth to a daughter, Mary, who would one day reign as Mary I. Despite this momentous event on the 18th day of that month, King Henry VIII's heart remained restless. He longed persistently for a male heir. One after another, each of the Queen's subsequent pregnancies ended in miscarriage or stillbirth, leaving Catherine to endure the agonizing cycle of hope and grief that no royal decree could mitigate. Meanwhile, Henry's liaison with Bessie Blount stretched far beyond the ephemeral encounters typically afforded to a monarch's favourites. Every so often he would return to her side, drawn by her youth and vivacity more than by any fleeting fancy. Then, in the late autumn of 1518, 17-year-old Bessie felt a profound shift within herself. Her body, unencumbered by any marital bonds, carried the unmistakable signs of pregnancy. Word of her condition could not be contained. From the gilded chambers of Greenwich to the shadowed alcoves of Westminster, whispers spread like candlelit smoke, and the court's curiosity flared into a smouldering blaze of gossip. In a twist as dramatic as any masque, Queen Catherine too was once more with child, creating a charged atmosphere of royal twins, one unborn to the lawful wife, the other to the teenage mistress. The juxtaposition was almost cruel, a queen draped in solemn majesty, and a girl on the threshold of womanhood sharing the same concealed miracle. Yet only one of these pregnancies would fulfill the realm's deepest desire. On the first day of June, 1519, Bessie was discreetly conveyed to a secluded convent some miles from the palace. There, the nuns' solemn chants and the hush of cloistered halls provided a sanctuary for her to give birth away from prying eyes. Courtiers were dispatched to attend her every need and to relay news directly to the king's privy chamber. The tension was palpable. Every soft footstep in the corridor echoed like a herald's trumpet, every rustle of linen a portent. After hours that seemed to stretch into eternity, the moment of truth arrived. Bessie brought forth a robust, healthy son. The midwife's soft announcement broke the stillness. It is a boy. The child was named Henry Fitzroy, the Norman French term for son of the king, an unmistakable declaration of paternity. His cries reverberated through the convent walls, a living testament to Henry VIII's virility and a direct challenge to those who blamed Catherine's womb for the lack of a male heir. For the first time, public opinion could no longer cling to the notion that the king himself was barren. The responsibility for England's future now rested squarely on the Queen's shoulders. King Henry, elated beyond measure, wasted no time in revealing his long-hidden progeny. The newborn prince was swiftly invested with titles befitting his royal blood. Duke of Richmond and Somerset, honours crafted to acknowledge his singular status. Heralds trumpeted the news throughout London, and messengers rode at full gallop to provincial courts, proclaiming the arrival of the king's firstborn son. In Westminster Hall, trumpets blared in triumph, and banners bearing the Fitzroy arms and ermine field charged with a red lion fluttered in the midday breeze. Yet even as the realm celebrated, Henry made a most decisive and cold turn. he severed his affair with Bessie Blount as abruptly as the tide retreats from the shore. Those closest to the court record that, almost at once, the king's attention shifted to new entertainments, and Bessie found herself cast aside like a precious trinket no longer in fashion. It was a move that stunned many. The very woman who had granted him the proof of his potency was now relegated to a footnote in the king's storied life. This poignant juncture marked a turning point not only for Bessie but for the monarchy itself. The birth of Henry Fitzroy in June of 1519 irrevocably altered the dynamics of the Tudor court. It underscored Henry VIII's unwavering determination to secure a male successor and foreshadowed the momentous upheavals that would follow. Catherine's eventual displacement, the break with Rome, and the chain of marriages and calamities that reshaped England's spiritual and political landscape. In the quiet aftermath of June 15, 1519, as courtiers retired to their chambers and the newborn Duke issued his next plaintive cry, a new chapter in Tudor history was inscribed. Yet for Bessie Blount, her youthful dreams entwined with the birth of a prince, this chapter would close as swiftly as it had opened, leaving her to navigate the ebbing tides of royal favour and the intricate currents of a court forever altered by the arrival of a boy born in secret. Immediately upon his birth on the first day of June in the year 1519, the infant Henry Fitzroy was granted the lofty title of Duke of Richmond and Somerset, a peerage ordinarily reserved for the highest nobility, yet bestowed here to affirm the boy's status as the acknowledged son of King Henry VIII. In a single royal edict, the king cemented the child's place within the realm's hierarchy, signalling to Europe that his potency was beyond question. Yet scarcely a fortnight later, the very woman who had borne this living proof of his virility found herself cast aside. Whispers abounded regarding Henry's abrupt severance of his liaison with Bessie Blount. Some chroniclers contend that the king simply completed his purpose. Once he knew he could produce a male heir, Bessie's role was deemed fulfilled. Others suggest that Henry, ever the romantic, had idealized their affair as a dreamscape of chivalric devotion. The reality of childbirth, its pain, its blood, its irrevocable alteration of Bessie's youth, shattered that illusion, and the king's ardour cooled. Moreover, Bessie's pregnancy and motherhood dispelled the secrecy that once cloaked their union. She ceased to be the ethereal muse, and became instead a mother encumbered with earthly duties. By the year 1522, the royal court had arranged a marriage for Bessie. Her bridegroom was Gilbert Talboys, Baron of Kyme, a man of reputable station but afflicted by a family reputation of mental instability. The union was contracted swiftly, with minimal ceremony, for the king sought to ensure both Bessie's secure provision and the elimination of any lingering scandal. Where once she had lounged on velvet cushions within the Jade Hall, attended by courtiers and flanked by silken tapestries, Bessie now donned the simpler raiment of a rural baroness. She traded ornate banquets for the stewardship of manor lands, the management of harvests, and the quiet rhythms of country life. Perhaps most wrenching of all was the loss of her maternal prerogative over Henry Fitzroy. Though she was not legally disinherited, the Duke's upbringing fell under the aegis of royal officials. Custom granted her a few stolen moments, with her son each year brief visits during which she might present him with a new doublet of white satin, or lead 2 fine steeds to his stable for his equestrian delight. But these encounters were strictly timed and closely supervised. The boy's education, his wardrobe, his very future were shaped by the king's advisors, as though Bessie's own hand had never cradled him at birth. To witness her child raised as a ward of the crown, rather than at her side, must have pierced her heart with an agony sharper than any physical pain she had endured in childbirth. In March of 1530, tragedy struck once more. Gilbert Talboys died, leaving Bessie a widow at the age of 32 and the mother of 3 young children. Her position, though still recognised by law, became precarious. Courtiers and suitors soon lined up at her gates, hoping to secure both her hand and, through it, a claim to the Blount family's royal connection. Among them was Leonard Grey, a distinguished soldier of the realm, aged approximately 20 summers younger than Bessie. Grey's offer was generous power, title, and an opportunity to cement his own fortunes, but Bessie, weary of being bartered like chattel, refused. She spurned both his wealth and his influence, asserting perhaps for the first time that her worth did not depend on the favour of powerful men. 2 years later, in the spring of 1533, Bessie entered into a second marriage. this time with Edward VIII, a gentleman of modest means and tame estation. Edward was 12 years her junior, and possessed neither vast estates nor courtly esteem. Yet Bessie's choice spoke volumes. She opted for a union born of affection rather than political calculation. The wedding, quiet, unadorned, and witnessed by only close friends, marked a profound shift in her fortunes. In the following years, Bessie found in Edward a partner who regarded her not as a commodity to be traded, but as a companion to be cherished. Freed from the gaudy pageantry of the court, she embraced a simpler existence, tending a small household, guiding her daughters in needlework and prayer, and harvesting their modest fields. The clang of armour and the murmur of papal ambassadors were distant echoes. In their stead, the melody of birdsong at dawn and the soft murmur of children's laughter filled her days. This new chapter contrasted starkly with her earlier life, when she'd been a prized object of regal desire, her every step orchestrated for the king's amusement. Now, under Edward's gentle guardianship, she exercised autonomy over her daily affairs, choosing what to plant in her garden, determining how her children would be educated, and deciding which lace to trim on her gowns. For a woman who had once been publicly displayed, privately used, and summarily cast away, the freedom to live quietly, to love, and be loved on equal terms, was nothing short of a revelation. Thus, in the calm years following 1533, Bessie Blount's life was distinguished not by the glitter of jewels or the clamour of courtly intrigue, but by the soft certainties of a hearth shared in mutual respect. In Edward's company, she found the dignity denied to her in the gilded halls of power, a testament to the enduring human yearning for agency, affection, and the simple right to chart one's own course. Though Bessie Blount had found a measure of peace and affection in her second marriage to Edward VIII, the capricious winds of fate would not let her rest. In the sultry days of July 1536, news arrived at court that Henry Fitzroy, her eldest son by King Henry VIII, had succumbed suddenly to a wasting disease. Reports varied between consumption, the common term for pulmonary tuberculosis, and the more fearsome pneumonic plague. But all agreed that the young Duke, at the age of 17, was struck down far too soon. The manner of his passing only deepened the tragedy. King Henry, perhaps fearing contagion or scandal, commanded that the body be interred without pomp or public ceremony. No grand funeral procession wound its way through the streets of London. No throngs of mourners lined the route to the chapel of St. Michael in Windsor Castle. Instead, the Duke's coffin was borne quietly beneath the gaze of a handful of weeping attendants. Bessie, retained by law as his mother yet barred from official attendance, was left to witness the king's swift orders from afar. The very earth seemed to swallow her cries, for she was denied even the solace of standing at her son's side as he was lowered into the ground. To Bessie's aching heart, this enforced absence was the cruelest blow of all. She had endured the pangs of childbirth, risking her very life to bring him into being. Now, robbed of the right to mourn, she was forced to grieve alone, with only the whispers of the wind in the thatched roofs of her country home to bear witness to her sorrow. Her son, a living testament to her youth and her sacrifice, was gone, and with him vanished the fragile link that had once bound her to royal favour. At that same juncture, the court was already turning its attention to fresh alliances. Henry VIII, having dispatched Anne Boleyn to the scaffold earlier that year, had entered into a brief, sorrowful union with Jane Seymour, who bore him a son, Edward VI, in October 1535, but died soon after from childbirth complications. Thus, Bessie Blount's legacy was bracketed by two royal tragedies: Anne Boleyn's execution in May 1536 and Jane Seymour's death only days later. Many observers would later remark that Bessie was, in effect, the first of Henry's consorts to be sacrificed on the altar of dynastic ambition used and then discarded once she had served her purpose. Yet in another light, historians concede that Bessie fared better than most of the king's paramours. She did not face a charge of adultery or treason. She was not confined in the Tower under harsh conditions, and she retained a measure of gentility as Baroness Feeney. Even as she languished in grief, she was spared the ignominy that befell Anne Boleyn, whose fall from favour culminated in a bloody beheading. Compared to the darkness that enveloped other ladies of the court, Bessie's departure was tempered by the fact that she had not been legally wed to the king and thus did not bear the weight of royal betrayal. Following the sparse and hurried rites of Henry Fitzroy's burial, Bessie's health, already fragile from years of emotional turmoil, rapidly declined. Letters from the time speak of a mysterious malady that sapped her strength, reducing her once vibrant figure to a pale shadow. By late 1536, she had retreated permanently from the glittering salons of London, returning to the modest estate she shared with Edward in Kent. There, away from the courtly intrigues and the sting of courtly whispers, she spent her days in quiet reflection, nursing wounds that time alone could not heal. Yet even as her public presence faded, a subtle thread of connection lingered between Bessie and her royal benefactor. For several years after their affair's end, they exchanged New Year's gifts, a tradition laden with symbolism in Tudor culture. Small keepsakes, perhaps a jewel-studded girdle or a prayer book adorned with a miniature portrait, passed between them, carried by discreet courier or devoted servant. Scattered fragments of surviving correspondence hint at letters penned, and received missives whose contents remain tantalizingly out of reach. These vestiges suggest that their bond, while diminished, had not been irrevocably severed. In the hushed corridors of that bygone era, Bessie Blount remained a figure of complex dualities. A proud woman once exalted by royal favour, now a solitary widow cloaked in mourning, a mother who had given her all, only to be robbed of her son's final farewell. A mistress whose love was both bound by power and liberated by loss. Her story, brimming with opulent gifts and devastating heartbreak, speaks to the timeless human struggle between agency and vulnerability, between the exhilaration of affections won and the desolation of bonds severed. And so, in the evenings of her remaining years, as the sun dipped below the Kentish horizon and the cockerel's calls faded into the twilight, Bessie Blount would sit by her window, gazing at the distant spires of Canterbury Cathedral. There, bathed in the last light of day, she would remember both her moment in the royal firmament and the sun whose laughter once lit her days. In those quiet moments, free from the buzz of courtly clamour, her heart found a fragile peace, an acceptance of the transient brilliance of love and the enduring ache of loss. In her final years, Bessie Blount resided peacefully in the rolling countryside of Kent, together with her husband Edward Feeney and their daughters. After the heartbreak of losing Henry Fitzroy in July of 1536, and the subsequent quiet years spent away from London's courts, she devoted herself to her family's well-being. Records from the period remain sparse, but it is generally held that Bessie passed from this life around the year 1540. Some sources suggest a possible range between 1539 and 1541. The exact cause of her death remains a matter of conjecture. Certain accounts propose that she succumbed to consumption, the pulmonary ailment that had claimed her son, while others posit that complications from the birth of her third daughter, Margaret, may have contributed perhaps hemorrhage or infection in the weeks following childbirth. Whatever the true cause, Bessie departed this world with little fanfare. No grand monument was raised in her memory, no epitaph engraved upon stone. Instead, she slipped quietly from life, leaving behind only the faintest traces of her existence, fading letters, whispered anecdotes, and the unmarked earth where her remains were laid to rest. Thus, the final chapter of the woman who once captivated a king closed without ceremony. Her passing, obscured by the mists of time, much like her life, had been overshadowed by the grand events of the Tudor court. In the generations that followed, Bessie Blount's presence in the annals of history was largely effaced. Unlike Anne Boleyn, whose rise and fall shook the foundations of church and state, Bessie never held a crown, never stood at the heart of a political maelstrom, and never bore the title of queen. She was not the mother of a sovereign in her own right, nor did she command the loyalty of powerful factions. Instead, she marked a single, unrepeatable pivot in royal affairs: the birth of Henry Fitzroy, the first acknowledged illegitimate son of Henry VIII. That solitary event would prove catalytic, undermining Catherine of Aragon's position, providing one of the principal justifications for the king's eventual divorce, and thus setting in motion the English Reformation, the schism that severed England from papal authority in Rome. It is worth pondering that Bessie never truly chose her course in life. She was steered continually by the currents of power and necessity. At the tender age of 12, she was dispatched to court as her family's instrument for advancement. At 13, she was the object of a king's infatuation. At 17, she bore that king's child. At 19, she was wed to Gilbert Taleboys in a union arranged by royal decree. In her early 30s, she was married again to Edward Feeney, perhaps in a rare assertion of personal desire, yet still guided by the shifting tides of circumstance. Throughout, her fate was determined not by her own volition, but by the imperatives of dynastic ambition and societal expectation. In a realm where every alliance, every childbirth, and every whisper could alter the balance of power, Bessie Blount remained an unwitting participant in grand narratives that eclipsed her own identity. She was the beautiful pageant upon which a sovereign projected his hopes, the midwife's secret, the vessel for a prince who would in turn disrupt the kingdom's spiritual and political allegiances. Yet she never wielded authority for herself. She was neither queen nor queenmaker, but a fleeting spark in a palace ablaze with intrigue. The brevity of her prominence only deepens the poignancy of her story. Bessie shone brightly for a moment, illuminating the heights of royal favour, only to disappear into obscurity once her light had fulfilled its purpose. In the silence that followed, her name faded from chronicles, her likeness lost to time, and her memory surrendered to the shadows where so many women of the Tudor court found themselves consigned. Today, there is a growing recognition that Bessie Blount deserves more than the footnote of a discarded mistress. She stands as a symbol of the often ruthless mechanisms of power, where beauty is transacted like currency, where personal agency is overridden by dynastic needs, and where the sanctity of motherhood is subordinated to the demands of a throne. Her life invites us to reflect on the costs exacted upon individuals, especially women, by the quest for political and religious dominance. Thus, in remembering Bessie, we honour not only the woman who became the first to yield a male heir to Henry VIII outside of wedlock, but also the universal struggles she embodies. The pursuit of dignity amidst exploitation, the yearning for self-determination in a world that prized her only for her utility, and the enduring ache of a mother who lost her child and her status in the same breath. In her fleeting glow, and her gradual descent into oblivion, Bessie Blount offers a haunting testament to the transience of favour and the resilience of the human spirit under the shadow of absolute power. Though Bessie Blount occupied only a marginal station in the grand tableau of Tudor history, her life story casts a stark light upon the darker machinations of the royal court. Her journey reveals the merciless calculus applied to women, traded as pawns in dynastic games, prized for their fertility, and discarded when no longer deemed useful. She began as a child of noble birth in rural Shropshire, her fate shaped by her parents' ambitions and a court that valued her as little more than an instrument for securing influence. At 12, she became a lady-in-waiting, her beauty and manners paraded before Catherine of Aragon's household. By her early teens, she was auctioned in the quiet dances and whispered confidences of the palace, drawn into a liaison that shone briefly under the candlelight. In a matter of years, she would bear the king's child, and then find herself married off to a country baron, her radiance dimmed by distance from power. Finally, she died anonymously, her grave unmarked, her memory nearly erased. Contrast her fate with that of the queens of Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, who sacrificed her youth, and perhaps her life's happiness in repeated, futile attempts to bear a son. Anne Boleyn, who gambled everything upon giving the king a male heir and paid with her head when she failed. Jane Seymour, who achieved her ambition of motherhood but perished in the aftermath of childbirth, and Catherine Howard, whose youthful indiscretions cost her life. Each bore the full burden of dynastic expectation, and each in turn was destroyed by it. Yet Bessie, the mistress, who actually produced a male heir recognized by the crown, received no such prominence or protection. She was outside the formal bounds of marriage, denied the dignity afforded even to a queen's widow. Her experience underscores that in Tudor England, no woman queen or concubine escaped the unrelenting currents of political necessity. Bessie's story also exemplifies the rigid, male-centered hierarchy of a patriarchal realm. In theory, the right of succession lay with the firstborn son. In practice, that son needed to be the product of lawful wedlock. Though Bessie provided Henry VIII with undeniable proof that he could father a boy, social convention and ecclesiastical law barred Henry Fitzroy from ascending to the throne. The king employed Bessie as a means to solve his dynastic dilemma, yet immediately cast her aside when her usefulness ended. This dynamic prompts a profound question. What is the true nature of power when it elevates individuals for a purpose, only to revoke that very recognition once the purpose is fulfilled? Power, it seems, can create human life, then discard it without remorse. Over the centuries, Bessie Blount's imprint upon history has been all but effaced. Her name flickers intermittently in legal records. A few surviving letters hint at the gifts exchanged between her and the king, and a handful of New Year's tokens stand as mute testament to their lingering connection. But no grand monument commemorates her. No engraved tablet preserves her likeness or her sacrifices. Instead, she has been relegated to the margins of the Tudor saga, overshadowed by the theatrics of royal divorce and the tragic fates of better-remembered women. Yet her legacy endures as a cautionary tale about the value of individual humanity in the face of abstract ambitions. She reminds us that proximity to power does not guarantee security or acclaim, that even those who help shape the course of empires may themselves vanish into obscurity. She was the instrument by which Henry VIII proved he could sire a son. She was the unwitting catalyst for the schism between England and the papacy, and she was the mother whose grief went unacknowledged and unmoored. In the end, Bessie Blount embodies the paradox of strength and vulnerability. Her beauty and charm won her the king's favour, yet her power was entirely contingent upon his will. She bore him a son of historic consequence, yet she carried that burden alone, uncredited and unprotected. And when that son died, her sorrow remained hidden behind the walls of a quiet country manor. As the Tudor court dramatised its grand narratives of marriage, execution, and reformation, Bessie's experience was woven into the background, a subtle yet essential thread. Her life encourages us to look beyond crowns and chronicles to the private costs exacted by political ambition. In her fleeting ascent and her silent descent, she stands as a testament to the human consequences of power's caprice. A reminder that behind every sovereign's triumph lies the untold story of those who served as conduits for that triumph, and then, all too often, were swept away by the tide of history. The tale of Bessie Blount, who gave her youth to the Tudor court only to be consigned to oblivion, offers lessons that resonate far beyond the 16th century. First and foremost, her story underscores the exaltation of male authority entwined with the subjugation of women. In the corridors of power, the Tudor regime celebrated the birth of a son as the highest achievement of a woman's body, yet these same corridors trampled on her personhood. Bessie, with her pale, luminous visage and graceful deportment, was chosen to provide King Henry VIII with an heir. Once her task was accomplished, she was cast aside, erased from the public record, as though she had served merely as a childbearing apparatus, in service to the crown's need for a male successor. Next, Bessie's experience reveals the fragile nature of relationships grounded in power and pragmatism rather than genuine affection. When Henry needed her, he attended to her every comfort, lavishing her with silken gowns and jewelled ornaments. He nurtured the affair under the sheen of chivalric pageantry, suggesting a romance that might transcend mere politics. Yet once he had proof of his virility, a healthy son recognized and ennobled, he released her without remorse. The veneer of courtly romance proved hollow. Their liaison was a transaction, contingent on his interests. Love, in this charged environment, existed only insofar as it advanced the crown's ambitions, not as an expression of mutual feeling. And yet, in the midst of such callousness, Bessie carved out a moment of autonomy that shines brightly amidst the shadows of her obligations. Though summoned back into royal service and then married off to Gilbert Taleboys as a matter of political expediency, she refused to be bartered a second time. When Lord Leonard Grey, a formidable nobleman, some 20 years her junior, offered her family's security in exchange for her hand, she declined. Later, she chose Edward Feeney, a gentleman of modest fortune and no courtly rank, over further alliances with those of higher status. In selecting Edward, she asserted her right to marriage founded on love, rather than advantage a bold act for a woman, in an era when marriages were almost always coerced for power or property. Finally, Bessie Blount's journey invites us to honour and remember the unsung heroes of history, those whose contributions have been essential yet are easily forgotten. Far from the grand stages of coronations and executions, Bessie's singular act bearing Henry Fitzroy provided Henry VIII with the justification he needed to divorce Catherine of Aragon, break with Rome, and inaugurate the English Reformation. In doing so, she set in motion transformations in both state and church that would define the Tudor age. While Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour received the lion's share of historical attention, it was Bessie's child who delivered the final proof of Henry's male potency, tipping the scales towards schism with the papacy. The arc of Bessie Blount's life, from a sheltered Shropshire girl to the king's clandestine champion, and finally to a humble country widow, forms a poignant refrain on the interplay of power, desire, and sorrow in a patriarchal society. She was invited into the inner sanctum of the realm's most exalted palace, only to be exiled to the fields of Kent when her value diminished. Yet, in each phase of her life, Bessie displayed resilience and grace, serving her king, bearing his son, managing her estates, raising her daughters, and ultimately exercising personal agency in matters of the heart. Though time may have relegated her to a footnote, Bessie Blount's legacy endures as a testament to both the capacities and vulnerabilities of women under male-dominated regimes. Her life challenges us to look beyond the grand narratives of kings and kingdoms, to consider the private sacrifices made in the service of public ambition. And in remembering her sacrifice, her sorrow, her quiet defiance, we affirm the vital importance of every individual story, especially those too often relegated to history's margins. In the dusky half-light of memory, Bessie Blount stands as a sombre reminder that behind every throne and beside every heralded heir, there are lives shaped, and sometimes shattered, by the inexorable dictates of power. When Bessie Blount stepped away from the glittering courts of Greenwich and Whitehall, she did not step out of history's gaze. The trajectory she followed from royal lady-in-waiting to king's mistress, then to baroness of the countryside, opened a new chapter in the Tudor interplay of politics and marriage. In February of the year 1522, her union was arranged with Gilbert Taleboys, Baron of Kyme, not as an affectionate match but as a diplomatic instrument. The king secured rural loyalty by placing his former favourite at the head of an important manor. Yet while the marriage conferred on Bessie a measured respectability and a tranquil estate in Lincolnshire, it also underscored a brutal fact of her era. Once wed, a woman's status was bound to her husband's life. When Gilbert died in October of 1530, Bessie became a widow at the age of 32, bereft not only of her spouse, but also of the protection that his title and lands had guaranteed. Widowhood in Tudor England was a perilous position. Legally, a widow like Bessie held dower rights to a fraction of her late husband's property, typically 1/3 of his income. But beyond that slender provision, she was vulnerable to powerful relatives and courtiers eager to seize any advantage. No longer shielded by her husband's influence, she was at risk of being drawn into contested inheritances or coerced into further alliances. Yet Bessie refused to be commodified again. In the autumn of 1531, she turned away the advances of Lord Leonard Grey, a distinguished soldier and court favourite, roughly 20 years her junior. Despite his offers of title and security, she spurned him, demonstrating that her worth did not reside solely in her capacity to forge dynastic ties. In the spring of 1533, Bessie remarried, this time to Edward Feeney, a gentleman of modest means and little courtly standing. Edward was 12 years her junior, and lacked the estates and heraldry that marked the Taleboys' lineage. Yet he offered her something rare in Tudor society, a marriage born of mutual respect and affection rather than political calculus. Together, they established a quiet household in Kent, where Bessie devoted herself to raising her daughters, overseeing the gardens, and tending the hearth. Removed from the intrigues of London's great halls, she found in domestic routines a measure of autonomy she had never known amid the pomp of the Jade Hall. But even as Bessie savoured this hard-won peace, tragedy struck again. In July of 1536, her son Henry Fitzroy, once the celebrated Duke of Richmond and Somerset, died unexpectedly at the age of 17 from consumption, or perhaps from an outbreak of pneumonic plague. The news arrived like a dagger. The boy who had embodied the promise of a Tudor male succession was gone. In accordance with the king's terse instructions, his burial was private and unostentatious, and Bessie was not permitted to attend. Thus, she was twice denied a mother's right. First, to nurse her son in life, and second, to grieve at his death. Her sorrow, deep, enduring, and solitary, became a silent companion in her remaining years. Following these losses, Bessie's health began to fail. Racked by the twin ghosts of her son's demise and the strains of childbirth, she grew frail and pale. By late 1537, contemporary letters note that she had withdrawn entirely from public life to convalesce at her Kentish home, where the ministrations of local physicians brought limited relief. Over the next 2 years, she endured a mysterious illness, variously attributed to tuberculosis, the same wasting disease that claimed Henry Fitzroy, or to complications arising from the birth of her third daughter, Margaret. Whether her final ailment was pulmonary decay, postpartum infection, or a combination of both remains unknown. Her death occurred quietly between the years 1539 and 1541. Some records lean toward 1540, though no precise date survives. There was no grand funeral procession, no vaulted crypt etched with her name, and no elegy composed by the court's poets. Instead, she was laid to rest on her own land, beneath a humble gravestone that has since vanished. Only a brief entry in the parish register, now lost, marked the passing of the woman who had once captivated a king and altered the course of English history. Bessie Blount's end may have been obscure, but her life's influence was profound. By embracing the roles of servant, mistress, baroness, and wife, she exemplified the mutable fortunes of Tudor women. She illuminated how marriages served as diplomatic tools, how quickly a woman's security could fade with her husband's life, and how extraordinary it was for a Tudor woman to claim her own agency in the choice of a spouse. Her story also remains a stark reminder of the human cost behind pivotal historical shifts. Without her willingness or necessity to bear Henry Fitzroy in June of 1519, the king would have lacked the tangible evidence to justify the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. That decision precipitated the English Reformation, a schism whose ripples shaped not only religious life, but also the political architecture of Europe. Although the narrative of Anne Boleyn or Jane Seymour often takes centre stage, it was Bessie's singular act, bringing forth a male heir, that gave Henry VIII the leverage to challenge Rome's authority. Thus, in her departure from the world, Bessie Blount left a legacy woven into the fabric of Tudor transformation. From her youthful arrival in Catherine's court to her final days at home in Kent, her life was a testament to the interplay of power, sacrifice, and resilience. Though her name may no longer grace the pages of every history book, the shadow of her choices endures, a whisper that behind every grand edict lies the private narrative of those whose bodies, hearts, and wills were entwined with the march of kings and kingdoms. The figure of Bessie Blount has gradually faded from the grand chronicles of Tudor history. Yet among scholars of the era, she remains a living testament to the ruthless workings of power. The birth of her son, Henry Fitzroy, on the 1st of June in the year 1519, provided King Henry VIII with the decisive proof he needed to pursue the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. That single event transcended its private origins to become a seismic rupture in the relationship between England and Rome, setting the stage for the English Reformation. In 1534, the English Parliament enacted the Act of Supremacy, declaring the king supreme head of the Church of England, and in doing so, severed centuries-old ties with the papacy in Rome. Had Bessie not borne a healthy male child, Henry VIII might never have found the grounds or the courage to seek a divorce. Catherine had given birth to a daughter, Mary, on the 18th of February in 1516, yet every subsequent pregnancy ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. Without the undeniable evidence of her husband's fertility that Bessie's son provided, the king could not plausibly claim that the failure of Catherine's womb justified annulment. Thus, it was Bessie, hidden away in a remote monastery in June of 1519, who furnished the living proof necessary to tilt the scales towards schism. In this light, it is not hyperbole to call her the unsung saviour of Anglicanism. She lent Henry the tangible evidence he needed, so that the nobility of England could officially break from papal authority and embrace a new religious order under their own sovereign. In stark contrast to Anne Boleyn, who boldly asserted her own influence and ambition as queen, Bessie departed the public stage in silence. Anne, though eventually condemned to the block in May of 1536 for her failure to produce a male heir, has endured in history's pages as a figure of dramatic rise and tragic fall. Bessie, who actually succeeded in giving Henry a son, slipped into obscurity once her purpose had been served. This divergence prompts us to question the criteria by which history chooses its protagonists. Those who stake their claims openly, seeking crowns, forging alliances, and wielding power are immortalized, while the contributions of those who operate in the wings are too often overlooked. Today, feminist historians view Bessie's life through the lens of gendered injustice. As a young girl of scarcely 13, she was dispatched to a royal household to serve her parents' ambitions, her beauty wielded as a political instrument. At 17, she bore the king's child, sacrificing her youth and health. Then, when her function had been fulfilled, she was summarily abandoned and married off for convenience. Her story encapsulates the voiceless plight of countless women denied agency and valued only for their ability to meet the needs of a patriarchal system. Yet Bessie's narrative also offers a message of resilience and reclamation. Despite the injustices she suffered, she eventually exercised her right to choose a marriage of affection rather than one dictated by dynastic expediency when she wed Edward Feeney in the spring of 1533. In that choice, she demonstrated that, even in a society that denied women autonomy, it was possible to assert personal will and forge a life untethered from the crown's caprices. In our modern context, Bessie Blount stands as a symbol of the enduring truth that women, though subject to the vagaries of power, possess the inherent right to reclaim their own destinies. She reminds us that behind every seismic shift in politics and religion lies the often unacknowledged toil of those who facilitated change from behind the scenes. In celebrating her or mourning her, we acknowledge the fuller tapestry of history, one that includes the quiet courage and private sacrifices of those whose names may not grace the textbooks, but whose impacts resonate through the ages. Thus, even as her name continues to flicker on the periphery of Tudor scholarship, Bessie Blount's story endures as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. Her fleeting moment in the royal spotlight proved pivotal to one of the greatest transformations in English history, and her subsequent journey toward personal autonomy speaks to a timeless struggle for self-determination. In remembering Bessie, we honor the countless women who have shaped and been shaped by the tides of power, and we reaffirm that every life, however briefly illuminated, leaves an indelible mark upon the course of human affairs. Beneath the veneer of courtly splendor, Bessie Blount's life reveals deep psychological scars rooted in her earliest years and the illusion of choice she was granted. At barely 12 years of age, she was uprooted from the familiar rhythms of her Shropshire childhood and transplanted into the opulent but unforgiving environment of Catherine of Aragon's household. There, she was expected to grow up overnight, mastering complex rituals of etiquette, navigating alliances among seasoned courtiers, and suppressing the natural whims of adolescence. This abrupt loss of innocence instilled in her a precocious self-reliance, but also a profound sense of dislocation. She was forced to inhabit an adult persona long before her spirit was ready. As she matured into her role as the king's favoured companion, Bessie found herself balancing the intoxicating lure of power with an acute loneliness. Henry VIII's attentions conferred upon her sumptuous jewellery, silken gowns, and a place at his side in the Jade Hall's nightly feasts. Yet his affection was conditional upon his own desires. Her identity became bound to her function as mistress, valued only insofar as she delighted and served the king. When she carried his child in the autumn of 1518 and gave birth to Henry Fitzroy in June of 1519, she reached what seemed at once the pinnacle of her influence and the nadir of her solitude. Motherhood, the greatest assertion of her agency, paradoxically deepened her isolation. Stripped of discretion by her pregnant state, she was sequestered away, watched by attendants, and denied the companionship of friends or the comfort of her own family. This entanglement of power and loneliness laid bare the transactional nature of her relationship with the king. Their liaison thrived on his needs, whether for pleasure, reassurance of potency, or dynastic strategy, and not on mutual devotion. Such a dynamic eroded Bessie's capacity to trust in any relationship that followed. After her first marriage to Gilbert Talboys at 19, a union arranged by royal decree, and his subsequent death in October of 1530, she refused further political matches, including the overtures of Lord Leonard Grey. Then, in the spring of 1533, she voluntarily married Edward Feeney, a younger man of modest means. This choice, grounded in genuine affection, stands in stark contrast to her earlier experiences of coerced alliances. It reflects not only her yearning for authentic connection, but also a reclamation of the power to shape her own destiny. Yet even this refuge proved temporary against the tide of loss. In July of 1536, the sudden death of her son Henry Fitzroy at 17 from consumption, or perhaps pneumonic plague, shattered the fragile peace she had found. The boy who had once bridged her past at court and her present as a baroness was gone, and with him vanished any lingering hope of renewing ties to royal authority. Bessie's grief was compounded by the cruelty of her exclusion. The king decreed a swift, unceremonious burial, and she was not permitted to attend. With her health already weakened by emotional strain and past childbirths, this blow left her spirit hollowed out. She withdrew further into solitude, her laughter silenced, her aspirations diminished. In the hush of her later years, Bessie carried the weight of a motherhood, denied and reclaimed only in memory. The rights and joys of maternal intimacy, nursing her son at dawn, guiding his first steps, sharing his triumphs, had been fleeting. When her son died, she was twice bereft, first by circumstance, then by decree. The political calculations that once elevated her also stripped her of her most elemental bonds, leaving her to grieve in silence. And yet Bessie's marriage to Edward VIII stands as a testament to her resilience and the reclamation of self-determination. Having been a mere instrument in courtly ambitions, she chose a partner unconnected to the glittering intrigues of Westminster. In that humble union, she rediscovered a form of domestic empowerment, overseeing her household, tending gardens, and raising her daughters in the rhythms of country life. No longer a captive of dynastic necessity, she exercised the simple but profound right to live for her own happiness. In tracing Bessie's arc from a child sacrificed to ambition, to a loved mistress, to a discarded royal, and finally to a woman guided by her own heart, we see a journey of transformation. She moved from victimhood toward agency, from the false promise of courtly favor to the authentic solace of personal choice. Her story resonates as a lullaby of power and loss, reminding us that even amid the highest dramas of monarchy, there remain the quiet struggles of the human spirit seeking its own peace. Bessie Blount's final imprint upon history serves as a profound reminder that a person's worth does not hinge solely on rank or privilege, but on the freedom to make one's own choices. Though she bore the king his long-desired son, was lauded in courtly circles, and later cast aside into obscurity, Bessie never surrendered to despair. Across her life, she occupied 4 distinct roles: royal lady-in-waiting, king's mistress, baroness, and ordinary wife, each offering its own mixture of opportunity and sacrifice. In every station, she maintained her dignity, asserting her individuality, even when circumstances threatened to reduce her to a mere instrument of power. As a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, Bessie learned the rituals and rigors of court life at barely 12 years of age. There, she gained refinement and status, but relinquished the freedom of childhood. When she became King Henry VIII's favoured mistress at 13, she enjoyed sumptuous gifts, embroidered gowns, jewelled ornaments, and nightly entertainments in the Jade Hall, but lost the protection afforded by marriage. Her third role, as Baroness Taleboys beginning in 1522, provided a measure of security and respectability, yet tied her identity to her husband's fortunes. When he died in October of 1530, she found herself vulnerable once more. Finally, in marrying Edward VIII in the spring of 1533, Bessie embraced the life of an ordinary wife, choosing affection over ambition and reclaiming the autonomy denied her in previous unions. Each of these transformations brought both gain and loss. As a court attendant, she gained status but lost innocence. As a royal mistress, she wielded influence, yet forfeited stability. As a baroness, she secured a title but depended on her spouse's survival. And as Edward VIII's wife, she found love but relinquished the trappings of power entirely. Yet throughout these changes, she preserved her self-respect, refusing to be defined solely by the men around her. Placed alongside the fates of Henry VIII's 6 queens, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, Bessie's story gains added resonance. Catherine of Aragon endured years of miscarriages and the strain of a public annulment. Anne Boleyn rose to the throne only to lose her head on the first day of May in 1536. Jane Seymour achieved her ambition of motherhood, but died on the 24th of October in 1535 from childbirth complications. Anne of Cleves, married in January of 1539, was soon divorced, Her portrait, once admired, relegated to a footnote. Catherine Howard was executed on the 13th of February in 1542 for adultery, and Catherine Parr survived, but spent her final days caring for Edward VI before her own death in September of 1548. Each queen suffered profoundly under the demands of kingship and succession, yet it was Bessie, never a queen, who bore the living proof of Henry's male potency. Her role in giving birth to Henry Fitzroy on the 1st of June in 1519 directly influenced the king's determination to break from Catherine of Aragon and sever ties with Rome. Unlike the queens, whose public rises and falls have been meticulously chronicled, Bessie performed her pivotal service in the hush of a remote monastery. When her task was complete, she slipped back into the shadows, her name omitted from the grand narratives. This juxtaposition raises vital questions about how we record history. Public figures who engage openly in power struggles, like the queens, often receive the lion's share of attention, their triumphs and tragedies painted in bold relief. Yet those whose contributions occur behind the scenes, who shape events not by wielding crowns but by fulfilling essential roles, are too often relegated to obscurity. Bessie Blount exemplifies this dynamic. Though never a queen, she was indispensable to the unfolding of Tudor transformation. In acknowledging Bessie's journey, we recognize that the tapestry of history is woven not only by those at the apex of power, but by individuals whose quiet decisions catalyze change. Her life invites us to look beyond the ceremonial and the sensational, to honor the silent architects of pivotal moments. Her story reminds us that true agency lies not in the accoutrements of authority, but in the freedom to choose one's own path, an enduring lesson for any era when the allure of power threatens to eclipse the sanctity of personal choice. And so, as the last echoes of Bessie Blount's remarkable journey settle softly into the annals of history, we allow ourselves a moment to breathe, to ease the tension of the past, and to embrace the gentle lessons her life imparts. Imagine the candlelight dimming in her quiet Kentish cottage, the faint crackle of the hearth's embers whispering stories of resilience and grace. Picture Bessie, no longer bound by courtly intrigue or the weight of dynastic ambition, reclining into a simple wooden chair, the afternoon sun slanting through the mullioned window, casting a warm, amber glow across her gentle features. In this stillness, we come to understand that her true legacy is not measured by titles won or alliances forged, but by the enduring strength of a woman who, though buffeted by the storm winds of power, chose to claim her own destiny. Her story invites us to recognize the dignity inherent in every choice we make, reminding us that the richest form of freedom lies not in the trappings of status, but in the quiet courage it takes to follow the heart's true course. Let the image of Bessie's final days fade slowly into the soft folds of memory, like the last note of a lullaby drifting into the hush of night. Allow her whispered example to settle deep within you, a reminder that even in our most vulnerable moments, we hold the power to shape our own story. Whether we are called to serve in grand hallways or to find contentment by a humble fireside, it is our willingness to remain true to ourselves that defines the measure of our lives. And now, as you drift towards sleep, carry with you the warmth of Bessie's resilience, the lightness of her final peace, and the gentle assurance that your own life, too, can be guided by the quiet strength of choice and compassion. May your dreams be filled with the soft glow of hope, and may you rest easy knowing that every whisper of your own heart matters. Sleep well, dear listener, and when you awaken, we hope you'll return for more tales crafted to soothe your spirit and feed your curiosity. Sweet dreams, and don't forget to subscribe, so you'll always be the first to hear our next story told, just for you, in the calmest of voices, here on our channel. Good night.